As always today, Mary Wollstonecraft. Emma Hart Willard was a pioneering reformer of women's education. A fervent believer that women deserved an education on par with men, she lobbied the New York State Legislature, and eventually in 1821, the Troy Female Seminary was established. Families from across the country sent their daughters to be educated according to the philosophy of Madame Willard. Born in Philadelphia, Charlotte Fortin Grimke was one of the most influential anti-slavery activists of her time. She was one of the first black teachers to go down south to attempt to educate slaves and former slaves. She was the first African-American teacher to be hired in Massachusetts, probably the first in the world to teach white students. Annie Sullivan, famous for her work with Helen Keller, and a pioneer in a kind of education that would change countless lives in the decades to follow, overcame very humble beginnings. Denied schooling, nearly blind, orphaned. Her life was transformed when she was allowed to go to school. Mary McLeod Bethune was a revolutionary educator, setting the standards for today's historic black colleges. Appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt as head of the National Youth Administration, the highest governmental position held by a black woman for years to come. Harry Truman appointed her to the 1945 Founding Conference of the United Nations. She was the first black woman granted an honorary degree by a college for white women. Katherine Dunham studied anthropology at the University of Chicago, focusing on the dances of the African diaspora. Opening and directing the Katherine Dunham School of Dance and Theater in New York, she was the first American dancer to present indigenous forms on a concert stage, and the first to sustain a black dance company. She was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965 as a cultural advisor to Senegal. Too often overlooked in the history of civil rights, Autherine Lucy was the first black to attempt to integrate the University of Alabama in 1956. She won a federal lawsuit requiring the university to admit her. Violence broke out with thousands of rioters storming a car in which she rode to class with the Dean of Women. Lucy was suspended 3 days after being admitted. Despite the threats to her life, she went back to court and her right to enroll was upheld. The NAACP lawyer who took her case was Thurgood Marshall. Autherine Lucy's single-handed effort to integrate a major higher education institution in the Deep South took tremendous courage and paved the way for later successful efforts. Patsy Mink was the first minority woman to serve in Congress. A Democrat who always chose her own path, even when it was a solitary one. Mink was a primary force behind the landmark Title IX legislation that opened up school athletics and academics to women in 1972. Upon her death, the law was renamed as the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act on October 29, 2002. Described as a force of nature, an activist, feminist, educational reformer, and philanthropist, Gracia Molina de Pic founded and wrote the curricula for the first AA degree in Chicano studies. She was one of the founding faculty of the Third College at the University of California, San Diego, where she developed the undergraduate sequence for Third World Studies. Okolo Rashid's experience as an educator began almost by accident. In 2000, Rashid saw a TV promo for an exhibit on Spanish culture. Amazed by the absence of any reference to Islam and its contributions to Spanish culture, she decided to organize her own supplementary experience for museum goers. The exhibit was so successful that Jackson community leaders made the exhibit permanent. Today, Rashid is director of the International Museum of Muslim Cultures and uses education to promote tolerance and understanding. One of the first women of the Cherokee Nation to receive a PhD. As a psychologist, Dr. Flies with Hawks works as an advocate for the American Indian community to help ensure their cultural values are respected. Through her role as co-director of the Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity Project on Inclusive Curriculum, she has enriched the lives of thousands of students in the U.S. and abroad. President and co-founder of Excelencia in Education, a not-for-profit organization working to accelerate Latino success in higher education by linking research, policy, and practice. Sarita E. Brown started her career at the University of Texas in Austin, building a national model promoting minority success in graduate education. She was appointed as Executive Director of the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans under President Bill Clinton. In 1985, Wilma Mankiller became the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, the first woman to do so. She has sought to improve health care, the education system, and government. For more than 2 decades, Wilma Mankiller led her people through difficult times, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998. Dr. Barcelo served at the University of Minnesota as Vice Provost and Vice President for Equity and Diversity, where she developed the infrastructure of this newly formed office, developed and implemented a strategic diversity statement, and developed the Faculty Diversity Research Institute. In 2010, she became the president of the Northern New Mexico College. Dr. Barcelo is a very vocal advocate for multiculturalism, persons with disabilities, and gay rights. Amazing stories, amazing women. These are some of the many women who have had an impact on education in the United States, and their impact still resonates.